10 years ago, Ronan Vale lost everything in a single night. The woman he loved vanished without a trace. His enemies whispered in his ear that she had left, and he believed them. From the ashes, Ronan built an empire of blood and fear, becoming the most feared mob boss on the east coast of America. But one rainy evening in Brooklyn, a child with eyes as cold as steel made the most powerful man in New York freeze in his restaurant because the child looked exactly like him. The story begins here. Like and comment the city you're viewing in so I know how far this story has come. The rain came down hard that Thursday evening, the kind that turned Brooklyn's sidewalks into shallow rivers and drove civilians off the streets early. Ronan Vale's black Escalade moved through the wet dark without hurry, 3 cars ahead and 2 behind, the convoy carrying him through Greenpoint toward the waterfront meeting that had already cost 2 men their lives just for being in the wrong room when it was scheduled. He almost didn't stop at the restaurant. It was Darius, his driver of 11 years, who saw the parking space open up directly in front of a place called Hart's Kitchen. Small, narrow, a handwritten menu board propped in the rain-fogged window. Ronan had been awake for 31 hours. His stomach felt like gravel. The waterfront meeting wasn't for another 2 hours, and eating at Cipriani or any of the dozen places that reserved his usual table felt like too much noise, too much performance. "Pull in," he said. Darius didn't question it. He never did. Inside, the restaurant was warm and cramped and smelled like garlic and something slow-cooked. 7 tables, 4 of them occupied. A handmade chalkboard listed the specials. The walls were hung with photographs of Brooklyn decades past, black and white, curling slightly at the edges. Everything about the place suggested a woman running it alone on tight margins and sheer stubbornness. Ronan took the corner table. 2 of his men posted near the entrance. The rest stayed in the cars. He shrugged out of his coat, sat with his back to the wall the way he always did, and picked up the laminated menu without reading it. That was when he saw the boy. He was working the far side of the room, maybe 9, maybe 10, small for his age, but moving with a kind of focused efficiency that didn't belong on a child. He carried a gray plastic bin for clearing tables, navigating the narrow spaces between chairs without being told, stacking plates with care. His dark hair was slightly too long and kept falling across his forehead, and every few seconds he pushed it back with the exact same impatient gesture, left hand, 2 fingers, hard push, like the hair was a problem he'd already decided to deal with later. Ronan watched him the way he watched most things, without appearing to. The boy cleared a 4-top in the back, wiped the table himself, reset the salt and pepper shakers with the kind of mechanical precision that suggested he'd done it 10,000 times. He wasn't performing. He wasn't performing for anyone. He was just working, quiet and serious, in the way of children who had learned early that the work didn't do itself. He looked up once and caught Ronan looking. He didn't look away first. Ronan felt something move through his chest that he couldn't immediately name. Not suspicion, not yet. Something older and more primitive than that. Something that lived in the body before the mind had words for it. A woman appeared from the kitchen. She was in her early 30s, wearing a faded navy apron, dark hair pulled back in a knot that was losing its fight with the evening. She carried 2 plates with the practiced ease of someone who had been waitressing long enough that her body did the job on its own. She set the plates on a 2-top near the window, said something to the couple there, smiled briefly, the smile of someone working, not of someone happy, and moved back through the room collecting menus. She hadn't looked toward Ronan's corner yet. He ordered from the younger waitress, a college-age girl who seemed mildly terrified of the men near the door, and sat watching the boy move between tables. The food came and he ate without tasting it. He was still watching the boy. The child picked up a glass that had been left near the edge of a table. He examined it briefly, saw it was cracked, set it aside on his bin with a small frown. Then he reached up and touched something at his neck, a quick, unconscious gesture, fingers closing around something small beneath his collar before his hand dropped again. Ronan's fork went still against his plate. He'd seen that gesture before, the touching of a thing at the throat, reflexive and private. His own father had done it. His uncle. He had done it himself for years before he'd stopped wearing the crest entirely. Too much weight, he'd told himself. Too much memory. He made himself breathe. He called Darius over with a look. "The boy clearing tables," he said, his voice below the ambient noise of the room. "What do you see?" Darius looked. He was a careful man, observant in the way that had kept him alive in Ronan's service. He studied the boy for a long moment without making it obvious. "Kid," he said, "keep looking." Darius did. The boy pushed his hair back with 2 fingers. He set down a stack of plates with both hands, deliberate, not clumsy. He straightened up and for a moment stood still, and in the stillness his posture was very particular. Weight slightly forward, chin level, like a person who expected trouble and had decided not to be afraid of it. Darius said nothing for a moment. Then quietly, "Huh." Ronan picked up his fork again. "Get Marcus on the phone when we leave. Tell him I need to know everything about this restaurant. Owner, employees, how long it's been operating. No contact, no approach. Information only." "Yes, sir." The woman in the navy apron finally came to check on Ronan's table. She was looking down at her notepad, already asking about dessert before she'd fully turned to face him. And when she looked up, the question stopped in her throat. The color left her face like a tide going out. Ronan looked at her, and 10 years compressed themselves into a single second. Not the 10 years of the empire he'd built. Not the violence and the alliances and the blood and the money, but the 10 years before all that. The 10 years he'd spent telling himself she'd made a choice, and that choice had been to walk away and that he was done grieving her. Elena Cross stood 2 feet from him holding a notepad and looking like a woman who had just watched the floor open under her feet. He said her name. She said very quietly, "No, no, no. Elena." "You need to leave." She said it fast, low, her eyes cutting across the room to where the boy was now returning from the back with a fresh bin. "You need to leave right now." "I'm not leaving." "Ronan, please, sit down." "I can't sit down. This is my restaurant. I have customers." "Elena." His voice was flat and quiet, and it held everything he wasn't saying. "Sit down." She didn't sit, but she stopped moving, her hand gripping the notepad at her side, her eyes going from him to the boy and back. And in that movement, that involuntary, protective, terrified tracking between the two of them, Ronan got the rest of the answer he hadn't yet consciously asked. His jaw tightened. She saw him see it. "Not here," she said. Her voice was barely audible. "He's right there." "Not here, Ronan, I'm asking you." "What's his name?" Silence. "What is his name?" Elena's throat worked. Her knuckles had gone pale where she was holding the notepad. "Noah," she said. Ronan looked across the room at the boy, at Noah, who was now carefully placing a glass on a table and didn't know he was being watched. The dark hair, the gray eyes, that posture like braced weight. The fingers touching whatever hung at his throat beneath his shirt. Something tore loose inside Ronan's chest in a way that 10 years of violence had never managed. He stood up slowly, set enough cash on the table to cover the meal 3 times over, and put on his coat. "I'm coming back tomorrow morning," he said. "You'll be here." It wasn't a question. Elena said nothing. He walked out into the rain. He didn't sleep. He sat in the study of his midtown penthouse until 3 a.m. drinking bourbon he didn't taste. And when Marcus called at 7 the next morning with a preliminary file, Ronan was already at his desk. Hart's Kitchen. Operating for 6 years, LLC, registered in Elena Cross's name. The building was leased, payments consistent but stretched. Current on rent, but only barely. 1 part-time employee. Elena handled the kitchen and front of house both. Open 5 days a week, lunch and dinner service. Before the restaurant, 5 years of waitressing at 3 different establishments, 2 in Brooklyn, 1 in Queens. Before that, a period of records that were thin, nearly absent, the kind of thinness that happened when a person was trying not to be found. Noah Hart. Age 9. Born 9 months after the last confirmed sighting of Elena Cross, a fact that Marcus recited in his usual flat report voice without commentary, which Ronan appreciated because it meant he didn't have to say anything. Enrolled at PS 172, above average marks in math and reading, no father listed on the birth certificate. Ronan closed the file. He drove to Brooklyn himself without the convoy, with only Darius and 1 other man. He arrived at 8:45, before the restaurant opened, and sat in the car until he saw Elena's silhouette moving behind the frosted glass of the front window. He went in. She was prepping the kitchen. She'd heard the door and had come out to the front already, wiping her hands on a cloth, and when she saw it was him, she stopped in the middle of the room and stood her ground. Barely. "You're early," she said. "You knew I'd come." She looked worn in a way that the low light last night had partially hidden, not beaten. Elena Cross had never looked beaten, even at her lowest, but tired in the deep tissue way that came from years of not enough sleep and too much worry. There were faint shadows under her eyes, and a tension around her mouth that hadn't been there when she was 23, and he'd been a different kind of man. "How long?" he said. "Ronan, how long have you known?" "From the beginning." Flat, no apology in it. "I knew before he was born." "You never contacted me." "No." "For 9 years." "Yes." She met his eyes. "For 9 years." The anger was there. It had been there since the restaurant, since her face went white at the sight of him, since he'd looked across the room and seen the shape of his own bone structure on a 9-year-old boy who didn't know he existed. The anger was real and deep, and he let himself feel the edges of it without letting it move his hands or his voice. "Why?" he said. Elena set down the cloth. She crossed her arms. "Because I was told you were going to die." She said it like she'd rehearsed it, and then decided the rehearsal didn't matter. "Because the people around you in those years told me, very clearly, with very specific details, that if I stayed, I'd be used to get to you, and you'd be dead within a month, and that if I disappeared quietly, you'd survive." Her voice was steady, but her jaw was tight. "I chose for you to survive." "Who told you that?" She hesitated. "Elena." "Who?" "A man named Mercer," she said. "Victor Mercer. He said he was protecting both of us. He said—" "Victor Mercer worked for me," Ronan said. "He ran logistics for the East Side operation for 4 years. He was never protecting anyone but himself." Elena's face shifted. Not surprise exactly, but the confirmation of something she'd suspected and never wanted to confirm. "I know," she said quietly. "I figured that out. Later, when it was too late to undo any of it." The silence between them had weight. Not the comfortable silence they'd once had, years ago in a different city, in a different life. But the silence of two people standing on opposite sides of something that had been broken and couldn't be unbroken. Only maybe rebuilt differently. "I want to meet him," Ronan said. "No. He's my son." "He doesn't know that." Her voice cracked on the last word and she steadied it. "He doesn't know anything about you. He thinks his father is gone. He's 9 years old and he has a routine and a school he likes, and he's fine, Ronan. He's a good kid and he's fine. He's clearing tables at 9 years old while you work yourself into the ground alone." Her eyes went hard. "Don't!" "I'm not attacking you. I'm saying what I know what you're saying." She took a breath. "I know exactly what you're saying, and I know what it looks like to you. But you walking into his life and telling him you're his father, do you understand what that does? Do you have any idea what it means to a kid who's built his whole world around—" She stopped, started again. "You don't get to show up after 9 years and decide how this goes. And you don't get to decide it alone anymore." He said it without heat, which was worse than saying it with heat. "That time is over." She looked at him. He looked back. Whatever she saw in his face made her close her eyes for a moment. "Give me time," she said. "Don't come in here with your men and your money and your everything. Give me a few weeks. Let me prepare him. Let me figure out how to—" "2 weeks," Ronan said. "That's not enough." "It's what I'm offering." Elena opened her mouth, closed it. Then, "You're different than I remember." 10 years, he said simply. She nodded slowly. The hardness in her face didn't leave, but something underneath it shifted. Acknowledgement, maybe. Or grief. He left before he said anything that would cost him more than he could afford. The investigation he launched wasn't about Elena. It was about Mercer. Victor Mercer had left Ronan's organization 8 years ago with a vague story about moving to private consulting, and Ronan had let him walk because the parting had been clean and the man had been useful, but not irreplaceable. That calculation now looked like the most expensive mistake of his career. What Marcus turned up over the next 72 hours was ugly. Mercer had not retired. He had moved laterally, building a parallel network using intelligence gathered during his years in the Vale organization, supplier relationships, port contacts, money launderers, the offshore structures that moved funds through legitimate-looking shells. He hadn't just left. He had been copying the architecture of Ronan's operation for years, piece by piece, until he had enough to stand alone. And he'd started by removing the one person who might have made Ronan too settled, too careful, too reluctant to take the risks the climb required. Elena. Ronan read the intelligence reports the way he read all bad news, in complete stillness, his face giving away nothing, the anger going somewhere internal where it became cold and hard and operational. On the 9th day after the restaurant, he had his first encounter with Noah. Elena had agreed, reluctantly, on strict terms, to let Ronan come in as a customer during a slow afternoon. No introduction, no disclosure, just presence. He sat at the corner table again. He ordered coffee. He watched. Noah was doing homework at a small table near the kitchen door, textbook open, pencil moving fast. Every few minutes he'd stop, look at something, frown the way Ronan frowned when a number didn't reconcile, and then write again. When Elena brought Ronan his coffee, she glanced at him once. A look that said, "You see what I mean? You see why you can't just blow up his world," and he received it without nodding. Noah looked up from his homework and found Ronan watching. The boy didn't look away. He studied Ronan the way children sometimes studied adults they found unusual. Direct, unembarrassed, making some private calculation. Then he said, across the room, "Are you a friend of my mom's?" Ronan felt the question like pressure behind his sternum. "Not yet," he said. Noah seemed to consider this answer, found it acceptable, went back to his homework. Ronan sat with his coffee going cold and tried to remember the last time he'd felt afraid of anything. He couldn't. But sitting in that small Brooklyn restaurant watching his 9-year-old son do long division, Ronan Vale, who had put men in the ground without losing sleep, felt something adjacent to fear wrap itself around his spine and hold. Because he understood now, with total clarity, what was at stake. And he understood with equal clarity that the moment Victor Mercer realized Noah existed, the moment Mercer understood that Ronan had a legitimate heir, a blood heir, a child who complicated every succession plan and power calculation in the East Coast underworld, the protection of that child would become the most dangerous problem Ronan had ever faced. He needed to move carefully. He needed to move fast. He was still working out which of those priorities outweighed the other when his phone vibrated on the table. Marcus. 3 words in the message. Mercer knows. Move. Ronan was on his feet before the phone finished vibrating, coat already in hand, eyes finding Elena across the restaurant, and the look on his face made her set down the tray she was holding very slowly. "We need to talk," he said. "Right now." Noah looked up from his homework, and somewhere across the city, a car was already in motion. The tray hit the floor. Elena didn't drop it. She set it down, deliberate, both hands, the way a person set something down when their hands had started shaking and they needed them free. The sound of ceramic on hardwood was small and final in the quiet restaurant, and Noah looked up from his homework with the particular alertness of a child who had learned to read rooms. "Mom?" "Finish your chapter," Elena said. Her voice was level. Almost. Ronan was already moving, not toward the door, toward her, closing the distance between them in 4 steps and dropping his voice to something below Noah's hearing range. "How many exits?" "What? Exits? Back door? Windows? Service entrance? How many ways out of this building?" She looked at his face, and whatever she saw there answered the question she hadn't yet asked. "Back door through the kitchen, opens to the alley, fire escape off the 2nd floor. That's the apartment." "You live upstairs?" "Yes." He turned to Darius, who had already understood, already moved to the front window, and was standing just inside the curtain checking the street. "Back exit. Car in the alley?" 2 minutes, Darius said. "Get it done." Elena stepped into his line of sight. "Ronan, tell me what's happening." "Mercer knows about Noah." The blood left her face the same way it had the first night. Fast, total, like something pulled a plug. She recovered in under 2 seconds, which told him everything about the years she'd spent managing fear alone. How certain? Certain enough that Marcus sent 3 words and not 6. He looked past her toward Noah. The boy had put his pencil down and was watching them with those gray eyes that saw too much. We're leaving. You pack 1 bag, 10 minutes. Things Noah needs, nothing else. I'm not. Ronan, I can't just. 1 bag. He held her gaze. 10 minutes. She read something in his face that stopped the argument before it finished forming. She turned and walked to the back without another word, disappearing through the kitchen door, and Ronan crossed the room to Noah's table. The boy sat straight in his chair, pencil set down parallel to his textbook, with that precise habit of his. He looked up at Ronan without flinching. Something's wrong, Noah said. Not a question. Your mom needs to take you somewhere for a couple days. You're going to pack a bag and go with her. Where? Somewhere safer than here. Noah looked at him for a long moment, 9 years old, and the eyes doing the kind of calculating that belonged on a chess player. Are you the reason it's not safe? The question hit Ronan somewhere between the ribs. He crouched down to the boy's level, forearms on his knees, and met the gray stare directly. No, he said, but I'm the reason it's going to be safe again. Noah seemed to weigh this. His fingers touched the thing beneath his collar. The reflex again, unconscious, and Ronan made himself not look at it. Okay, Noah said, and closed his textbook. The apartment above the restaurant was small and clean and told the story of a woman who had made very careful choices with very limited resources. 2 bedrooms, a living area with a second-hand couch, and a shelf of Noah's library books organized by size. The kitchen had a corkboard above the counter pinned with school schedules, shift reminders, a grocery list in Elena's handwriting that said, eggs/rice/Noah dentist Thursday in the corner. Ronan stood in the living room while Elena moved through the bedroom, fast and silent, pulling things from drawers with the practiced efficiency of someone who had packed in a hurry before. He looked at the apartment and understood something he hadn't let himself understand until now. This was the life she had built. Not a placeholder, not a waiting. A real life, assembled piece by piece, month by month, held together by her alone. The restaurant downstairs that smelled like garlic and had photographs of old Brooklyn on the walls. The shelf of books organized by a child who had his mother's precision and his father's stubborn self-sufficiency. The grocery list, the dentist appointment. She hadn't been waiting for rescue. She had never been waiting for rescue. She came out of the bedroom with a duffel, went into Noah's room, came out again in 4 minutes. There's a woman, Carla. She helps me with the morning prep, Elena said, moving to the kitchen and pulling her phone from the counter. I need to call her. Text only. Keep it short. She looked at him. Why? Because Mercer has people who monitor calls. Text, brief, say you have a family emergency, you'll be in touch. Nothing else. She typed without arguing. He watched her hands. Steady now, the shaking pushed down beneath the surface where she kept things. That was Elena. She always kept things under the surface until there was space to feel them, and then she felt them completely and privately. And by the time anyone else saw the aftermath, she'd already rebuilt herself. He had loved that about her. He had also, in his worst moments alone, hated her for it. They went out the back through the kitchen, into the alley where Darius had a black sedan idling. Elena pushed Noah in first, got in after him. Ronan took the front. The car moved before the door was fully closed. Noah sat pressed against his mother's side without making a production of it. Not clinging, just touching, the way kids established physical reassurance without admitting they needed it. Elena had her arm around him but was looking out the window, reading the street. Where are we going? She asked. My place, for now. The silence from the back seat lasted about 4 seconds. Your place, Elena said. It's secure. 8-man rotation on the perimeter. Controlled access. It's the safest building in Manhattan right now. That's a sentence I would expect you to say without any irony whatsoever. Elena. We're going to a Mafia penthouse, Ronan. We're going somewhere Noah doesn't get taken. Call it what you want. Another silence. Then, from Noah, quietly, what's a Mafia penthouse? Elena closed her eyes. Ronan said nothing. The penthouse occupied the top two floors of a building on 57th Street, with views that meant nothing to Ronan, and that Noah, when they arrived at nearly 10 at night, pressed his face against immediately. The skyline spread out like scattered glass, the dark gaps of the park, the rivers running either side of the island. "This is your house?" Noah said. "One of them." The boy looked at him. "How many houses do you have?" "Noah," Elena said. "4," Ronan said. Noah turned back to the window. He didn't say it was impressive. He just looked at it with the same flat assessment he gave everything, taking inventory, filing it away. Ronan recognized the habit because it was his. He showed Elena the guest suite, 2 rooms connected. She'd take one, Noah the other. She walked through both without comment, checked the windows out of what seemed like old habit, checked the lock on the interior door. "I want a key," she said. He gave her one without discussion. Noah fell asleep within the hour, still in his clothes, the duffel open on the floor beside him, and his textbook pulled out and set on the bedside table. Elena stood in the doorway, watching him for a moment, then pulled the door almost closed and followed Ronan to the main room. The conversation they needed to have had been in the air between them all night, a pressure system waiting. She sat on the far end of the couch. He stood by the window. "Tell me everything you know about Mercer," she said. He told her. He kept it clean and factual, not because he was protecting her. Elena Cross didn't need protection from information. She never had. But because clean facts moved faster than narrative. Mercer's parallel network, the intelligence he'd extracted during his years inside the Vale organization, the money structures, the East Side contacts. Elena listened without interrupting. Her arms were crossed, not defensive. It was how she held herself when she was processing. When he finished, she said, "He told me you'd be dead within the month if I stayed." "I know." "That was a lie." "Yes." "He needed me gone so you'd burn everything down." She was quiet for a second. "Did you? Burn things down?" Ronan looked at her. "What do you think?" She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "I think you built a bigger empire on the wreckage and told yourself it was strength." Her voice wasn't mean about it, just precise. "I think you did exactly what he expected you to do, and you did it so completely that by the time you were done, there was no going back to anything." He didn't answer because she wasn't wrong. "I grieved you," she said. The flatness in her voice changed. Something moved under it, old and unresolved. "Not your death, just you, the version of you that existed before. I grieved him for a long time." "And the version standing in front of you now?" She looked at him. "I don't know him yet." "No." "That's not an accusation." "I know." The city outside was doing its 11 p.m. business. Sirens at distance, light pollution staining the low clouds orange. Ronan turned back to the window. There was a thing moving in his chest that he'd spent 10 years learning to ignore, and it was not cooperating tonight. "You should have told me," he said, not loudly. "When you figured out what Mercer had done, when you understood the truth of it, you had 9 years to find a way to tell me." Elena's jaw tightened. "And say what, exactly?" "That my son existed. Your son, who would have been placed in the middle of exactly what's happening tonight the moment you knew." She uncrossed her arms. "You think I didn't calculate that? You think I didn't go over it 1,000 times? Every year, every birthday, every time Noah asked about his father and I had to—" She stopped. Her voice had gotten close to the edge, and she stepped back from it. "I made a choice based on what I knew. I kept him safe. I kept him out of this. And now he's in my penthouse with a security detail because Mercer is moving anyway. Your calculation had a shelf life. So did your patience, apparently." The words landed sharp. He absorbed them. "I'm not your enemy," he said. "I know that." Her voice was quieter now, the sharpness already folding back. "I know. I'm sorry. I just—" She pressed her fingers to her eyes briefly. "I'm tired, Ronan. I've been tired for about 9 years, and I don't have the energy to fight you right now." He crossed the room and sat down. Not close, the other end of the couch, a deliberate distance. "I'm not trying to take anything from you. I want you to understand that. I'm not trying to erase what you built or the way you raised him. I'm trying to make sure he survives long enough for any of it to matter." She lowered her hands from her face and looked at him, and in the low light of the room, she looked exactly like herself at 23 and nothing like her at all. "When do we tell him?" she asked. He felt the weight of the question land. "When it's safe." "That might be a long time." "Yes." She nodded slowly. Then, "He's going to be angry when he finds out. Not at you. He doesn't know you yet. At me, for not telling him." Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. He understands things. He's 9, but he understands things the way a much older person does. And he's going to look at me and know that I made a choice, and he's going to... Elena. He waited until she looked at him. "Deal with that when it comes. Right now, nothing else matters but getting him clear of this." She held his gaze, nodded once. Marcus came in the morning with 2 men and a file, and the kind of controlled expression that meant the news was going to require sitting down to receive. Ronan received it standing. Victor Mercer had moved faster than anticipated. In the 48 hours since the intelligence alert, he had repositioned 3 operational teams within New York, recalled 2 lieutenants from Baltimore and Philadelphia, and most critically, had made contact with 2 members of Ronan's own outer network. Names Marcus laid out on the table with the flat precision of a man delivering autopsy results. Ronan looked at the names. He recognized both. "Confirmed?" he said. "Intercepted communication?" "Confirmed." He turned away from the table, moved to the window, stood looking at the skyline for a long moment. His reflection in the glass was still, face still, hand still, the whole exterior architecture of a man in complete control. Inside, something cold and methodical was doing the calculation. 2 men in his outer network. That was a perimeter problem. They were logistics contacts, not inner circle, not anyone with knowledge of the penthouse or the close security arrangements, but it was a signal. Mercer was building leverage points. He was not building to threaten. He was building to strike. "What does he know about Noah specifically?" Ronan said. "Our assessment is that he knows the child exists and is yours. We don't believe he has a location." "How long before he does?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "If he has assets inside Brooklyn, the restaurant neighborhood is known. 24 hours. Maybe 48. Ronan turned back to the room. "I want those 2 names handled quietly. No noise, no escalation. I don't want Mercer knowing his communication was intercepted. Let them think they're still operational." He moved to the table and flipped the file closed. "And I want a full secondary protocol on this building. Additional rotation, shift change at irregular intervals. I don't want pattern in the security." "Already in motion," Marcus said. "What else?" "The Vail lawyers have a concern." Marcus said it carefully, the way he introduced anything touching on the formal structure of the organization. "With the child's existence now known, or soon to be known, there are succession considerations. The inner circle is going to ask questions." "Let them ask." "Ronan, I said let them ask. No announcements, no preemptive conversations. Nothing changes until I say it changes." Marcus accepted this with a nod and left. Ronan sat down at the table in the empty room and stared at the closed file. The succession concern was not nothing. It was, in fact, the thing he'd been avoiding articulating since the moment he stood in Hart's kitchen and understood what Noah was. An heir. A blood heir, legitimate in every way the Vail family line recognized, which meant that anyone who had positioned themselves as a potential successor, anyone who had built their own influence on the assumption that Ronan Vail would die without a direct heir, now had an entirely different calculation to make. And not all of them would make it peacefully. He was still sitting there when the door from the guest wing opened and Noah came into the room in yesterday's clothes, hair doing exactly what it always did, carrying his textbook. He stopped when he saw Ronan. "Is there coffee?" he said. Ronan looked at him. "How old are you?" 9. A pause. "I don't actually drink coffee. I was asking for my mom. She's still getting dressed." Ronan stood and moved to the kitchen, found the machine, started it without speaking. Noah came and sat on one of the stools at the counter with the automatic ease of a kid who adapted fast. "You own this building?" Noah asked. "Yes." Do you own a lot of buildings? Some. What do you do? Ronan looked at him across the counter. The gray eyes were direct and patient and giving absolutely nothing away. I manage assets, Ronan said. Noah seemed to consider this answer and find it incomplete but acceptable for now. He opened his textbook. My mom says when something sounds boring, it usually means it's actually complicated. Ronan said nothing. Is it complicated? Noah asked, not looking up from his book. Very, Ronan said. The coffee machine finished. Ronan poured a cup and set it at the counter's edge for Elena, and for a minute the only sound in the penthouse was the traffic noise from 57 floors below and the quiet scratch of a pencil on paper. Then his phone rang. Marcus? Again, which meant something had broken faster than anticipated. He answered it and turned away from the counter, and Marcus said, They made a move on the restaurant 20 minutes ago. Accelerant. The kitchen took damage before a neighbor called it in. Elena's contact, the prep woman Carla, she was inside. Ronan's hand tightened on the phone. Carla's status. Minor burns. She got out. He exhaled once, controlled. This was a message. For a test, see who runs to the scene. He looked back at Noah, who had not looked up from his textbook. Pull everything in, Ronan said into the phone, low and flat. I want every available man inside the city perimeter by tonight. And call the Vale lawyers. Tell them to prepare the family declaration filing. Full formal recognition. Marcus was quiet for half a second. That will be public. That's the point, Ronan said. If Mercer already knows, the only advantage I have left is making the first move. A formal declaration puts Noah under the full protection of the Vale name, legally and organizationally. It changes the calculus for every player in this city. It also signals to every enemy you have that the heir exists and is real. Mercer already knows. Ronan turned back to look at Noah. The dark hair, the pencil moving, the textbook open to a page about fractions. Let everyone else know too. Let them see I'm not hiding him. Let them see what it costs to move on a Vale. He ended the call. Elena appeared in the doorway in fresh clothes, her hair down, and she looked at his face and stopped moving. What happened? She said. Hart's kitchen, he said. There was a fire. She went very still. Carla? She's out. She's okay. He held Elena's eyes. The restaurant took damage. Elena stood in the doorway of his kitchen looking at him, and he watched her process it. The restaurant, 6 years of her life. The thing she had built from nothing, the place where she had made a life for herself and her son, the handwritten menu board and the photographs of old Brooklyn and the table near the kitchen door where Noah did his homework. And he watched her hold all of it in her body without letting it break her posture. Her eyes were bright with something she was not going to let become tears. Not here, not in front of him. Okay, she said, very quietly. Elena. I said okay. She moved to the counter and picked up the coffee cup and held it in both hands and looked out the window. What's the plan? He told her about the formal declaration. He explained it cleanly without dressing it up. What it meant legally, what it meant operationally, what it signaled to every faction in the New York underworld. When he finished, she turned from the window. You're publicly claiming him, she said. Yes. Without telling him who you are first. The silence landed between them like something heavy dropped on hardwood. Ronan had no answer for that, because she was right, and they both knew she was right. And they both knew that the window for a quiet, careful, prepared conversation with a 9-year-old boy about the truth of his father was now closing at a speed neither of them had controlled. He had made the call. He had made it because it was the right tactical move, the only move that gave Noah immediate legal and organizational cover, the move that took the initiative away from Mercer and put it back in Ronan's hands. He had made it without consulting her. Elena looked at him across the kitchen with an expression that was not quite anger. Anger was loud, and this was quiet, and said, You made a decision about my son, Elena said, without asking me. The words were level. No volume, no heat. That was worse. Ronan set his phone on the counter. He didn't look away from her. I made a tactical decision under a time constraint. The restaurant fire changed the... Don't. She set the coffee cup down with a controlled click. Don't explain it to me like I'm one of your men who needs the logic laid out. I understand the logic. I understood it before you finished the sentence. Her eyes were steady and direct and giving him nothing. I'm telling you that you made a decision about Noah, about who he is, about what his name means, about what his life becomes. And you made it alone, in about 30 seconds, while he was sitting 10 feet away doing fractions. Ronan said nothing. That's who you are now, she said. Not an accusation, an observation, which was harder. That's how you move. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying I need to know that's what this is. Because if that's what this is, if I'm here and Noah is here and you're making the calls and we're the people the calls get made about, I need to know that clearly, right now, before anything else happens. Noah had gone still on his stool, pencil down, listening. Ronan looked at Elena for a long moment. Then he said, "You're right." She waited. "I should have pulled you out of the room first. I had 40 seconds and I used them wrong." He held her eyes. "It won't happen again." Elena looked at him the way she looked at things she wasn't yet sure she believed. Then she turned to Noah. "Go get your shoes on." "Why?" Noah said. "Because I said so, and we're going to have a conversation, and you should have shoes on for it." Noah looked between the two of them, calculating, and then slid off the stool and went to the guest wing without pushing it further. Smart kid. He knew when the adult conversation had reached a temperature that required absence. Elena turned back to Ronan. "When do we tell him?" "Today," Ronan said. "Before the declaration files. He hears it from you and me, not from a document or a lawyer or something he reads online." She absorbed this, nodded once, tight. "I'll lead it. You follow my pace. If I slow down, you slow down. If I stop, you stop. He's going to ask questions that you don't know the answers to, and some of those questions are going to be for me, and when they are, you let me answer them." "Agreed." "And Ronan." She waited until she was certain he was hearing her completely. "Whatever he feels, you take it. You don't redirect it. You don't explain it away. You just take it. He's earned whatever he feels." Ronan said, "I know." She looked at him one more moment. Then she went to get Noah. The conversation happened in the main room with the skyline behind them, Noah on the couch, Elena beside him, Ronan in the chair across, close enough to be present, far enough not to crowd. Elena started it the way she started hard things, directly, without a long runway. Noah listened. He was very still while she talked. His hands were in his lap, and he was looking at the middle distance between Elena and Ronan, that specific focus of a child processing something too large for its container. When Elena finished the essential facts, "Your father is alive, he didn't know about you, I made choices I thought were protecting you." Noah sat with it for a long time. Then he looked at Ronan. "You didn't know I existed," Noah said. "No, not until 11 days ago." "When you came into the restaurant?" "Yes." Noah looked back at the middle distance. His jaw moved slightly, working on something. "The man at the restaurant before that. 3 weeks ago. The one who asked Mom too many questions about the lease." He paused. "Was that you too? Someone working for you?" Ronan went very still. "No." Noah looked up. He asked her how long we'd been there, whether we had family nearby. He bought coffee and didn't drink it. Elena had turned to look at Ronan. "That wasn't my man," Ronan said. He kept his voice even. "Describe him." "Medium tall, hair starting to go gray at the sides. He had a ring on his right hand that he kept turning." Noah touched his own finger, demonstrating. "He left a 20 for a $3 coffee and didn't wait for change." Ronan looked at Elena. She looked back at him and her face had gone to something carefully flat, the expression she wore when fear was doing its work underneath. Mercer had been watching before Ronan even found them. He said, "Noah, you did well noticing that." He meant it. "We're going to talk more, you and I, but right now I need 5 minutes with your mom. Can you stay in this room?" Noah looked at him with those gray eyes. "You're not going to tell me what it means." "Not yet. But it's bad. It's something I need to handle. Yes." Noah was quiet. Then, "Okay." He picked up his textbook from the cushion beside him and opened it. and the gesture was so precisely a performance of normalcy that it made something in Ronan's chest ache with a pain he had no name for yet. Ronan moved to the far end of the room with Elena close behind him. "He was watching us before you found us," she said, her voice barely above breath. "Mercer was already... He was tracking Noah independently. Maybe he found the Veil crest somehow, some record, some..." Ronan stopped, rerouted. "It doesn't matter how. He knew. And he let me find Elena myself. Let me start this process. Let me move Elena and Noah here." He felt the shape of it landing before he fully articulated it. Elena saw it in his face. "What?" "He wanted them here," Ronan said. "He wanted me to bring them to the most fortified location I have, because once they're inside a fixed location, it becomes a target instead of a safe house," Elena said. They looked at each other. Ronan was already moving, pulling his phone, calling Marcus, and Marcus picked up on the first ring. "The penthouse is compromised," Ronan said. "Not structurally, tactically. Mercer baited me into consolidating. We need to move. Secondary location. Do not use any address that's in writing anywhere. Use the VC Street property, the one that's held under the Callaway LLC. Nothing connects it to Vale." Marcus said, "Understood. 2 hours?" "1." He ended the call, turned back to Elena. "Pack again," he said. She looked at him without moving. How bad is this about to get? Honest answer, he decided. She'd earned honest answers. Bad. She nodded once and went to get Noah. They were 40 minutes into packing when Marcus called back, and the call lasted 11 seconds, and when Ronan lowered the phone, his face had changed in a way that Elena, coming out of the guest room with the duffel, noticed immediately. "Ronan." He looked up. His eyes were flat in a way she hadn't seen in 10 years and had hoped not to see again. "Marcus is compromised," he said. The duffel hit the floor. "What is that?" "The communication about the Callaway property. Marcus was the only person I told. Mercer's team hit the VC Street address 4 minutes after I made that call." His voice was without inflection, which meant the inflection was somewhere internal being converted into something else. "Marcus has been feeding Mercer our movements." Elena stood in the middle of the room and felt the floor do something it wasn't supposed to do. "Marcus has worked for you for 12 years. Silence. "How long?" she said. "I don't know yet." He set the phone down on the table with a careful, deliberate movement. "Long enough to have fed him the information that mattered." Elena looked at him. "The restaurant. He knew exactly when we left. He knew where we were going." "Yes." "The security rotation, the irregular shift patterns you ordered." Ronan's jaw was tight. "Mercer knew those the moment I ordered them. The full shape of it was assembling itself in the air between them, and neither of them wanted to complete the picture, but both of them already had." "Noah's description," Elena said. "The man in the restaurant 3 weeks ago, before you found us. You think Mercer had been watching independently, so But what if Marcus told him? What if Marcus knew you were investigating and fed Mercer the information about the restaurant before you even... Then Mercer has had a 6-month head start, Ronan said. At minimum. He moved to the window and stood with his back to the room, and Elena watched the line of his shoulders and recognized the posture. The particular stillness of a man absorbing a wound and deciding what to do with the pain rather than letting it make the decision. 12 years. Ronan had trusted Marcus with the inner architecture of everything. Safe house locations, financial routing, personnel files, contingency plans. Not because Marcus was the warmest man in the organization, he wasn't, but because he had been consistent and careful and loyal in the specific transactional way that Ronan had learned to value over affection. Except he hadn't been. "Where is he now?" Elena asked. "I don't know." Ronan turned from the window. "He'll have run the moment he understood the VC property had been hit. He'll know I know." "Can you find him?" "Eventually." He looked at her. "But finding Marcus doesn't solve the immediate problem. Whatever Mercer knows, and he knows everything Marcus knew, he's already using it, which means every safe house I have is a potential ambush. Every contact in my network is a potential asset of Mercer's. I don't know the extent of the contamination." He said the word contamination like a surgeon naming a diagnosis, precise, and without sentiment. "So what do we do?" Elena said. "We get Noah out of this building in the next 30 minutes. We go somewhere that exists in no file Marcus ever touched, and we do it with the minimum number of people, none of whom were part of the standard security rotation." "Who does that leave?" "Darius," Ronan said, "and 2 men from the outer ring who Marcus had no operational contact with." He paused. "And you?" Elena looked at him. "Me? You've been operating independently for 9 years without organizational infrastructure. You know how to move without leaving pattern." His voice was direct, not flattering. "Right now, that's more valuable than a team of men whose files Marcus may have seen." She held his gaze, then nodded. "Get Noah," he said. They left through this building's service infrastructure: freight elevator, loading dock, a delivery entrance on the 56th Street side that came out into a narrow service corridor that most people who lived in the building didn't know existed. Ronan had known about it for 7 years and never used it, which meant it was clean. Darius had a nondescript white cargo van, not Vale vehicles, not anything registered to any name in their network, a private acquisition Darius had maintained separately for exactly the kind of situation that Ronan had once hoped would never be necessary. Noah sat in the back between Elena and one of the 2 outer ring men, a quiet Irishman named Cullen who had the particular stillness of someone trained in patience. Noah had his textbook again. He was not reading it. The second outer ring man, a younger guy named Rafe, rode up front with Darius. Ronan sat in the back with the others, phone off, watching the streets through the tinted window as they moved downtown. "Where are we going?" Noah asked. "Queens," Ronan said. "Do you have a house in Queens?" "A friend does." Noah looked at him. "Does your friend know we're coming?" "She will." Noah seemed to accept this. He looked out his own window at the city moving past. "The thing around my neck," he said, without looking back at Ronan. Ronan waited. "Mom always said it was from my dad. She said she didn't know much else." Noah still wasn't looking at him. "It's a crest. I looked it up once. Vale family, old lineage, mostly private records." He paused. "I knew for about 2 years." Elena turned to look at her son. "Noah, I didn't say anything because you weren't ready to say anything." He said it without blame, just the flat delivery of a boy who had been sitting with something hard and had decided to be patient about it. "I figured if I waited, eventually—" He shrugged one shoulder, small. "Eventually, you'd tell me." The van was quiet for a moment. Noah finally turned and looked at Ronan directly. "The man in the restaurant," he said, "the one asking questions. Is he the reason we're in this van right now?" "Yes." "Is he dangerous?" Ronan looked at his son for a moment. 9 years old, gray eyes, braced posture, the same face that looked back at Ronan from photographs taken of his father at this age. A resemblance so clear that Ronan wondered how Elena had moved through 9 years without anyone in the Vale network happening to see the boy and understand immediately. "Yes," Ronan said, "he's dangerous." Noah nodded, like this was information he could work with. "Okay." He looked back out the window. "I'm not scared," he said. And then, after a beat, "Well, I am a little, but I'm okay." Ronan said nothing. He looked out his own window and breathed through something that was entirely new to him, a fear that had nothing to do with himself, that lived completely outside his own skin, that existed in the shape of a 9-year-old boy with a veil crest at his throat who had known the truth for 2 years and waited patiently for the adults to catch up. The house in Queens belonged to a woman named Stella Vane. No relation, coincidental name. A retired immigration attorney who had done quiet work for Ronan 7 years ago and had since maintained a mutual arrangement that asked nothing of either of them until it needed to. Her house was a narrow 2-story in Woodside, unremarkable, on a block of unremarkable houses, with a basement that had been professionally soundproofed for reasons that Ronan had once helped arrange and had never asked about. Stella met them at the back entrance with the expression of a woman who had seen complicated situations before and wasn't interested in performing surprise. She was in her 60s, white-haired, precise in her movements. She looked at Noah and said, "Are you hungry?" Noah said yes. She took him to the kitchen. Ronan used Stella's landline, the first landline he'd used in years, which was exactly the point, to reach the one contact outside his compromised network that he trusted absolutely. A man named Holt, federal, whose relationship with Ronan occupied the complex gray space between law and necessity that both of them had agreed years ago never to examine too closely. Holt picked up on the second ring. Ronan said, "I have a problem." "You have several," Holt said. "Victor Mercer's name has come up in 3 separate federal intercepts in the last 72 hours. We've been building a file on him independently for about 8 months. "What does your file say?" "That he's been running a parallel criminal network built on intelligence sourced from inside the Vail organization, that he has port contacts in Newark and Baltimore, that he's been cleaning money through 4 shell corporations, 2 of which have connections to a state-level contractor." A pause. "And that in the last week he's moved from intelligence gathering to operational deployment. He's not just watching anymore." "I know," Ronan said. "He burned my restaurant in Brooklyn last night. He hit a safe house address 40 minutes after I communicated it on a line I thought was secure." Holt was quiet for a moment. "You have an internal breach." "Had. He's run." "Marcus Hale?" Holt said. Ronan went still. "You know, we flagged irregular communication patterns between Hale and a Mercer-linked number about 4 months ago. We were building the chain before moving on it." A careful pause. "I'm sorry I didn't move faster." 4 months, Ronan said. He said it very quietly. "We didn't know what was at stake on your end. We didn't know about—" Holt paused. "There's a child, isn't there? That's what this is now." Ronan said nothing. "The formal declaration filing," Holt said. "It hit our system about an hour ago. Vail family heir, formal recognition. That's not a small move, Ronan. It wasn't meant to be. It paints a target. It also changes the legal architecture around the child's protection. If anything happens to me, I understand why you did it." Holt's voice was flat, but not unkind. "I'm telling you Mercer will read it as an act of war." "It is an act of war." A long silence on the line. Outside the kitchen door, Ronan could hear Stella talking to Noah in a low, easy voice, and the sound of a chair scraping, and Noah saying something that made Stella make a small amused sound. "I need federal cover," Ronan said. "Not for me, for the child and his mother. I need them off the board, outside Mercer's reach, while I deal with this." "That's a significant ask. I know what it costs. I'll pay it." Another pause. "There's a federal witness facility in upstate New York. Clean, no connection to any of your operations or Mercer's networks. I can have it arranged within—" "No facility," Ronan said. "Elena won't accept a facility." "Then what?" "Federal protective detail. Plainclothes, mobile, rotating. She and the boy maintain normal movement pattern as much as possible. She needs to feel like she has—" He stopped, started again. "She needs to not feel like a prisoner." Holt was quiet for a moment. "You know her well." "I knew her." "And now?" Ronan looked through the kitchen doorway. Elena had come in at some point and was sitting at Stella's kitchen table with Noah, her hand on the back of his chair, watching him eat. She looked tired in a way that went bone deep, the kind of tired that wasn't going to be fixed by sleep. But she was upright, and her eyes were clear, and she was watching her son with an expression that was both vigilant and tender in a way that made something in Ronan's chest do an uncomfortable thing. "Arrange the detail," he said to Holt. "I'll handle the rest." He ended the call. He stood in the hallway for a moment, alone, listening to the quiet sounds of the house. Stella's kitchen, Elena's voice now asking Noah about his homework, the ordinary sounds of an evening that had no right to be ordinary given everything surrounding it. Then Cullen appeared at the end of the hallway from the front room, and his face was the specific face of a man carrying information he wished he were not carrying, and Ronan understood before he spoke. "Rafe," Cullen said. "He made a call." Ronan's blood went cold. "When?" 20 minutes ago. Used his cell, stepped outside to the alley. Short call, maybe 40 seconds. "Where is he now?" "Front room. He doesn't know I flagged it." 40 seconds. 20 minutes ago. They'd been at Stella's house for 35 minutes. Mercer had a location, a 20-minute head start on processing it, and Ronan had 3 men, one of whom had just proven himself a liability, between Noah and whatever was already in motion. He looked at Cullen. "Get Elena and Noah to the basement, now, quietly." He kept his voice at a level that would not carry. "Tell Elena it's a precaution. Don't tell her about Rafe." Cullen moved. Ronan walked to the front room. Rafe was standing near the window with his phone pocketed, arms crossed, performing casual with the specific overcorrection of a man who had just done something he was rehearsing reasons for. He was 26, broad-shouldered, had been in the outer network for 18 months. Long enough to have been recruited. Long enough to have been useful to someone. He turned when Ronan entered, and his face did the thing faces did when they understood too late that they had been seen. "Hey," Rafe said. "Everything okay?" Ronan crossed the room in 4 steps, took the phone from Rafe's jacket pocket before the younger man could process the movement, and looked at the recent call log. Unknown number, 38 seconds, 17 minutes ago. Ronan looked up at Rafe. "I can explain," Rafe said. His voice had the particular quality of a person who had no explanation but was hoping the sentence would buy time for one to appear. "I know," Ronan said, and his voice was very quiet, the way it got quiet when something in him had already made a decision that the rest of him was still catching up to. "You were going to explain that Mercer approached you 3 months ago, that he offered you money and a position in his network, that you've been a standby asset, not active, just available, reporting when activated." He watched Rafe's face confirm each sentence as he spoke it. "That tonight when I used a clean number and a clean location, it was too significant to sit on, so he activated you." Rafe had gone pale. "There are cars coming," Ronan said. Not a question. Rafe said nothing, which was its own answer. Ronan looked at the phone in his hand, looked at the window, looked at the ceiling as if he could see through it to the street above, and felt the specific cold clarity that arrived in moments when there was no longer any margin for anything except the next correct move. Somewhere in this house, his son was in a basement with a woman who had spent 9 years keeping him safe, and outside on a Queen Street, Victor Mercer's people were already. Ronan pocketed Rafe's phone and looked at him for exactly 2 seconds. "Sit down," he said. "Don't move. Don't speak." Rafe sat. Ronan went to the hallway, moved fast to the kitchen, found Stella at the counter, and spoke quietly into her ear. She nodded once, no panic, no performance, and moved to a drawer near the stove, opened it, and produced a key on a plain ring. "Tunnel connects the basement to the garage on the next property," she said. "Been there 20 years. Door at the far end of the basement, behind the water heater. Blue Ford in the garage, registered to nothing you'd recognize." He took the key. "You need to leave too." "I know where to go." She was already untying her apron. "I've had a bag packed for a situation like this since the 2nd year of our arrangement." He left her to it. The basement stairs were narrow and steep, and at the bottom Cullen had positioned himself between the stairwell and the far wall, where Elena sat with Noah on an old wooden bench, her arm around him, Noah upright and steady in the way that was beginning to feel like the defining thing about him. The space smelled like concrete and old wood, and the particular stillness of an underground room that absorbed sound. Elena looked up when Ronan reached the bottom step. He didn't explain. He looked at Cullen. "There's a tunnel behind the water heater, Blue Ford on the other end. You take them through, you get them moving, you head toward the Holt contact point. I'll send the address to the landline at the receiving location." He pulled a folded paper from his jacket, an address he'd written in the hallway, handed it over. "You don't stop, for anything." Cullen took the paper. "And you?" "I'll be behind you." Elena was on her feet. "Ronan, there's no time." "How many are coming?" "I don't know yet." "Then I'm not leaving until—" "Elena." He stepped close and dropped his voice and held her eyes. "Noah goes through that tunnel right now. That is what happens next. Everything else is negotiable." "That isn't." She looked at him for a half-second that contained about 100 things neither of them had time for. Then she turned to Noah. "Come on." Noah stood without argument. He looked at Ronan once, direct, measuring, and then followed his mother toward the water heater without being told again. Ronan watched them go. Then he went back up the stairs. The first car arrived 4 minutes after Ronan returned to the front room. He watched it from the edge of the window. A dark SUV moving at the specific deliberate pace of a vehicle that was not in a hurry because it didn't need to be in a hurry, which was the most dangerous kind. It parked 60 feet up the block. A second car came from the other direction 30 seconds later and parked at roughly equal distance on the other side. They were bracketing the house. Ronan assessed. 2 vehicles, and the way the doors opened told him 4 men from the first car, likely the same from the second. 8 total. Maybe a rear element he couldn't see from this angle. Against him and Cullen. Except Cullen was in the tunnel, which meant against him alone, in a house that was no longer a safe location. He looked at Rafe, still sitting in the front room chair, with the posture of a man who had done the math and didn't like his own numbers. "How many did you tell him?" Ronan said. Rafe's jaw worked. "I just gave the address, that's all I—" "How many is Mercer sending for this location?" A pause. "I don't know. I didn't ask." Ronan believed him, which was almost worse. Rafe had handed over an address like handing over a piece of paper, something transactional and small, without asking what would arrive at the end of it. Outside, no one had moved from the cars yet, which meant they were waiting. For a coordinator, for a signal, for someone who wasn't there yet. Mercer. Ronan felt this understanding settle through him with the cold clarity of a thing that had been true for days and was only now fully named. Mercer wasn't just sending men. Mercer was coming himself. Because Noah wasn't just a tactical problem to be handled by proxies. Noah was the reason for all of it. The heir, the succession threat, the single fact that complicated everything Mercer had built on the assumption that the Veil line would eventually die without continuation. Mercer was coming to close the problem personally, which meant he wasn't here yet, which meant there was still a window. Ronan moved to Stella's kitchen, opened the cabinet above the refrigerator where she kept what she'd always called her insurance policy. A flat box, unremarkable, that contained a compact 9mm and 2 full magazines. He'd helped her source it 6 years ago and had never expected to use it himself. He checked the load with the fast efficiency of muscle memory, pocketed 1 magazine, chambered around. He went back to Rafe. "When Mercer arrives," he said, You're going to walk out the front door and tell him the location is clear and we moved on. You're going to be convincing." Rafe stared at him. He'll know what you tell him. If you tell it right, it buys 5 minutes." He held the younger man's eyes. "You made a choice when you called him. You get 1 chance to make a different one. That's it. 1. Rafe swallowed, nodded. "If you run instead," Ronan said, without raising his voice, "I'll know within 30 seconds. Think about what that means." He moved to the back of the house, through the kitchen, out to the alley. The alley behind Stella's block ran between 2 rows of narrow yard fences, lit poorly by a single distant streetlight. Ronan moved along the fence line toward the cross street, staying close to the wood, listening. The city noise was constant. Traffic, a siren 3 blocks east, someone's television through a ground floor window. And beneath it, the specific quality of men trying to be quiet, which was its own kind of sound. He found the rear element at the alley's cross point. 2 men, positioned at the corner, watching the back of Stella's house. They were facing away from him, which was the advantage he needed and which would not last. He took it. The first man went down without making useful noise. The second turned at the wrong moment, not wrong enough. And Ronan hit him with the controlled force of someone who understood that unconscious was better than the alternative, not for ethical reasons, but for operational ones. Noise complicated things. Blood on concrete in an alley complicated things differently, and he filed that distinction away and moved. He stripped one of them of a radio and an additional weapon, a compact with a full magazine, and pressed himself into the shadow of a fence gap, listening. The radio crackled. A voice he didn't know. "Rear element, confirm position." He waited. The radio crackled again. "Rear element." Silence from him. Silence did not satisfy radios. He moved before the silence became a problem, crossing the alley and taking the long way around to approach the front of the block from the east side, moving against the natural angle of anyone watching Stella's front door. The third car arrived as he came around the corner. It was different from the first 2. A black sedan, older model, moving with the deliberate, unhurried pace of something important. It parked directly in front of the house. The door opened. Victor Mercer stepped out. Ronan had not seen him in 8 years. The intervening time had done what time did. Thickened the waist slightly, whitened the hair at the temples, settled certain lines around the mouth and eyes into permanence. But the way he moved was exactly the same. Straight-spined, deliberate, the walk of a man who had decided long ago that showing caution in his posture was an admission he refused to make. He was 61 years old, and he carried himself like a man who had never once in his life been afraid of the thing in front of him. Ronan watched from 60 feet away, pressed into the shadow of a parked car, breathing through his nose, making no movement. Mercer surveyed the house, said something to the man beside him, looked at the front door. Rafe opened it. Ronan watched Rafe's posture, the way he stood in the doorframe, the set of his shoulders, the tilt of his chin, the performance of a man with nothing to hide, which was the most obvious possible tell. Mercer looked at him for a long moment. Then Mercer said something Ronan couldn't hear from this distance. Rafe answered. Mercer nodded slowly, said something else, turned slightly and scanned the street with the systematic sweep of a man who had survived as long as he had by doing exactly that. His scan reached Ronan's position. Stopped. The shadow in the distance should have been enough. They weren't. Something in the geometry of the scene, the angle, the shape of a man pressed against a car, in a way that distinguished itself from the car, triggered whatever it was in Victor Mercer that had kept him alive in the same world as Ronan Vale for 30 combined years. He said one word to the man beside him. Ronan moved. The next 4 minutes were the particular kind of 4 minutes that got compressed in memory into single images and sounds. A shot taken from behind a parked van that went wide because the shooter was adjusting for distance and Ronan was already not where he'd been. The sound of running on concrete and the different sound of running on wet grass as he cut through a yard. A chain-link fence that cost him 3 seconds and a line of torn skin across his palm that he felt as heat and ignored. Radio voices cutting in and out on the stolen unit in his jacket pocket, coordinate language. Box him in. East side, east side. He came out on the parallel street 2 blocks from Stella's house and put his back against a building wall and breathed for 3 seconds, which was all he allowed himself. His phone, the clean burner, the one Marcus had never touched, showed a text from Cullen. One word. Moving. They were clear of the tunnel, moving toward the contact point. He exhaled. The radio in his pocket said, "He's on Donovan, heading north," which was accurate and also meant someone had visual on him from elevation, which changed the geometry of everything. He looked up. Apartment windows, a water tower, a fire escape on the building directly across. And there, on the 3rd-floor landing of that fire escape, the shape of a man with a long sight line down the street. Ronan was already inside the building's front door before the man on the fire escape could relay a correction. The building was a walk-up, narrow stairs, the smell of 100 dinners and decades of radiator heat. He went up fast, not to the 3rd floor but to the 4th, and out the window at the end of the hallway onto the fire escape above the shooter's position. The man below him heard it, the metal vibration, the give of the grating, and started to turn, and Ronan came down the stairs of the fire escape with enough speed and force that the turn didn't complete in time. The radio clattered off the fire escape railing and fell 3 stories to the alley below. Ronan looked at the man. Young, 20-something, not someone he recognized from Mercer's known personnel, which meant Mercer had been recruiting deep, and took his weapon and his radio earpiece and left him zip-tied to the railing with his own belt because killing 20-year-olds who had been stupid enough to take Mercer's money was a line he had not yet crossed and did not intend to. He climbed back to the 4th-floor window and came out through the building's side entrance onto a cross street and pulled out the clean burner and called Holt. Holt picked up on the first ring. "Mercer is physically present," Ronan said. He was walking fast, not running, which was less visible on a city street. "Queens, Woodside. He's got a minimum of 8 men on the ground, possibly more. I've degraded his rear element and his elevated position, but I don't have a count on what's left around the primary vehicles." "We have a team 12 minutes out," Holt said. "Federal assets, full authority. I pushed the order 20 minutes ago." 12 minutes. Best I could do. 12 minutes was a long time. 12 minutes was the length of a siege on a residential block in Queens. "Can you get eyes on the location? I need to know whether he's staying on the street or entering the house." A pause. "Give me 2 minutes." Ronan kept moving. He circled back toward Stella's block from the north, approaching from the angle least covered by the remaining men, using the parked vehicles as interrupted sight lines. The 2 original SUVs were still in position. Mercer's sedan was still at the curb. Mercer himself was on the front step of Stella's house. Not inside yet, which meant Rafe had told him something that required verification, not something that satisfied him. Mercer was waiting for confirmation from the rear element and the elevated position, and neither was answering, and the quality of his stillness on that step had shifted from patience into the specific alertness of a man revising his assessment in real time. Ronan counted the visible men. 5, in addition to Mercer. The 2 from the rear element were down. The elevated man was zip-tied to a fire escape. That left the driver of the sedan and potentially a reserve he couldn't see. He needed Mercer away from the house and away from the street. He needed this on ground of his choosing, not Mercer's. He pulled the stolen radio from his pocket. He pressed the transmit button and used the voice he'd spent 30 years learning, the specific flatness that communicated authority without identification, and said, "Primary target last seen entering the structure at Denton Avenue. 2-story brick, blue door. Confirm." Denton Avenue was 4 blocks east. It was also, as best Ronan knew, completely unrelated to anything happening tonight. But it was specific enough and directional enough to move men. 2 of the 5 visible figures looked at each other. One spoke into his radio. Mercer's head turned slightly at the transmission. He wasn't buying it. Of course he wasn't. Victor Mercer had 30 years of reading operations and misoperations, and a message that convenient on a frequency he controlled was a message he was going to treat as the manipulation it was. But the 2 men were already moving because they were operating on radio authority and not on Victor Mercer's personal read of the situation, and their movement drew 1 more man with them, and now there were 2 men directly flanking Mercer and a driver in the sedan, 4 total. Ronan moved. He came at it from the east side, using the van as final cover, and the geometry was bad. He was going to be visible for 3 full seconds before he reached the first position of cover near the house, and that was 3 seconds of open ground in a street with professional shooters. He ran it anyway. The shot came from the sedan, the driver, who had more angles than the others, and it was close enough that Ronan felt the displaced air move past his ear before he heard the report, and he went left and hard and got behind the stone pillar of Stella's front steps, with his shoulder hitting the stone at a speed that sent a jolt of white pain up his arm, and he stayed upright on pure refusal. Mercer had turned. They were 15 feet apart, Mercer on the step, Ronan behind the pillar, and through the gap between the pillar and the doorframe their eyes met. 8 years since they'd been in the same room. 8 years, and all of the intervening geography, the empire Ronan had built, the network Mercer had stolen from it, the 10 years of Elena's absence that Mercer had engineered, compressed itself into the 3 feet of air between them. "Ronan," Mercer said. His voice was exactly as Ronan remembered, calm, considered, the voice of a man who thought of everything as a transaction that could eventually be reasoned through. "You look like you've had a difficult evening." "Victor." Ronan's shoulder was screaming. He ignored it. "Where's Marcus?" "Somewhere safe." A slight pause. "Marcus made a practical decision. You shouldn't take it personally. He fed you my safe houses, my security rotations, my contact at VC Street. The anger was there, but it was down low, operational, not clouding anything." "How long?" "Long enough." Mercer moved 1 step down, careful, watching the pillar. "You built something remarkable. I want you to know I've always believed that. The loyalty infrastructure, the financial architecture, genuinely impressive over a long run, but you were always going to reach a ceiling, Ronan. You lacked the flexibility that comes from not having attachments." A beat. "Or I should say, you lacked it until now." "Don't." "The boy changes everything." Mercer's voice remained even. "A legitimate heir is a succession event. It reorganizes every relationship in the network, every alliance, every—" "I know what it does." "Then you understand why I can't allow it." The 2 men flanking Mercer were positioned at the base of the steps, watching the pillar. The sedan driver had re-established his angle. The 3 who had gone toward Denton Avenue might already be turning back. Ronan heard the calculation and hated it. "He's 9 years old," Ronan said. "I know. You burned a restaurant because a 9-year-old boy exists." Something shifted in Mercer's expression. Not guilt. Mercer did not do guilt, but a form of discomfort at the specific way the sentence was constructed. "I burned a restaurant to send a message that this situation needed to resolve quietly. The child and his mother disappear. You go back to running your operation. Nothing changes that needed to. He's my son." The words came out flat and absolute and ended the conversation's pretense of civility. Mercer looked at him for a moment, then, "Take him." The two flanking men moved simultaneously. Ronan came out from behind the pillar at an angle neither of them expected, inside the reach of the first man before the grab could close, and the fight was short and technical and brutally efficient, and left the first man down on the steps, and the second with a broken grip and Ronan's elbow in his face, and it cost him. The shoulder that had hit the pillar screamed through the movement, and his left arm went partly unreliable in a way that was going to matter. And then the sedan driver fired again, and this one caught the stone step 2 inches from Ronan's foot, and sprayed concrete fragments that stung his ankles through his pants. He was back behind the pillar. Mercer had retreated 2 steps up. The second flanking man was down. The shoulder was bad. Not broken, probably, but the joint had been knocked in a direction joints weren't designed for, and it was making its objections felt in a way that narrowed his options. He heard the Denton Avenue team coming back. Radio chatter, footsteps on the parallel block. 90 seconds to contact. He looked at the door behind him. Stella's front door, still slightly open from when Rafe had been standing in it. Past that door, the basement stairs. Past those, the tunnel. The tunnel Cullen had used to move Elena and Noah. The tunnel that came out in a garage on the next property. The tunnel that was the one clean exit left in this situation. He made the calculation. He pushed off the pillar and went through the door. The basement was empty, and the far wall showed the tunnel door open, the water heater pushed slightly aside from where Cullen had moved it. The tunnel was low and dark, cement-walled, barely wide enough for one person, lit by a single bare wire that had probably been installed by someone 30 years ago who didn't expect anyone to run through it. Ronan ran through it anyway, bent at the waist, the shoulder complaining with every impact of foot on ground, and came out into the garage on the other side. A 2-car garage, attached to a house, a light on in the utility room, the smell of old oil and cardboard. The blue Ford was gone. Cullen had taken it. In its place, parked beside a riding mower, was an old green pickup that did not belong to anyone in this situation. He heard the tunnel behind him, footsteps, more than one set. He found the truck's keys in the sun visor where 40% of people who stored keys in the garage kept them, because human beings were predictable under pressure, which was the foundational truth on which every operational decision Ronan Vale had ever made was built. He started the truck. The garage door was manual. He got out, lifted it, got back in, and moved the truck out into the alley behind the house as 2 of Mercer's men came through the tunnel door into the garage. He drove. He drove 6 blocks north before he pulled over and sat for a moment and let his shoulder have 30 seconds of his attention. He moved the joint carefully, testing range. Functional. Not good, but functional. The burner showed 2 messages from Cullen. The contact point address, a diner on Northern Boulevard that Holt had designated, and then all 3 here, waiting. 3. Elena, Noah, Cullen. He exhaled. Then Holt called. "Federal team is on site," Holt said. "Stella's block. Mercer's men are scattering. We have 2 in custody. Mercer himself—" A pause that contained something Ronan didn't want to hear. "He's not at the scene." Ronan gripped the wheel. "He ran. His sedan is gone. We have plates. We have an APB, but—" "He's not going to be found by an APB," Ronan said. "He runs dark. He has infrastructure you haven't mapped yet. He'll go to ground." He stared through the cracked windshield at the Queen's Street, the unremarkable late-night normalcy of it. Gas station on the corner, a laundromat still lit. How long before he resurfaces? That depends on what he decides his next move is. Ronan already knew what the next move was. He'd known since Mercer said, "I can't allow it on the front step," since the calculation of a man who had spent 30 years building something he did not intend to lose showed itself plainly in those 4 words. Mercer hadn't come to Queens to retrieve intelligence or to demonstrate leverage. He'd come to end it, to remove the heir and reduce the equation back to the version of the future where Victor Mercer's network ran parallel to and eventually superseding the Vale organization, and the only obstacle was a man who could be managed if he had nothing and no one to protect. The heir was still alive. The obstacle still stood. Mercer would not let the equation stay unsolved. He would go for Noah again. Ronan put the truck in drive and moved toward Northern Boulevard, and the night was cold and clear, and the lights of Queens ran past the windows in smears of orange and white, and his shoulder pulsed with a steady pain that was the most honest thing he'd felt in hours. And somewhere ahead of him in a diner booth, his son was sitting with Elena and doing the particular math of a 9-year-old trying to understand the shape of the world he'd just been shown. He drove faster. He reached Northern Boulevard and saw the diner, its windows yellow and warm against the dark, and pulled into the lot and sat for a moment, engine running, watching the entrance. 2 of Holt's plainclothes were already in position, which meant Holt had moved faster on the protective detail than promised. He killed the engine and got out. The diner bell chimed when he pushed the door. Cullen was at the counter. Elena and Noah were in the last booth against the wall, and Noah saw Ronan first, those gray eyes tracking the entrance the way they always tracked entrances now, a habit of vigilance that the last 18 hours had installed in a 9-year-old and that Ronan felt as a specific cold weight in his chest. Elena looked up. She looked at his shoulder, at the way he was holding his left arm, at the state of his jacket. She said nothing. He slid into the booth across from them. Noah studied him for a moment. "You're hurt." "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." Ronan looked at his son. Then, "The shoulder. It'll be okay." Noah nodded, absorbing. Then, "Did you get him?" Ronan held the gray gaze. "No," he said. Something moved across Noah's face. Not fear, not disappointment. Something older and more resigned. The expression of a child who had been adding up the numbers all night and had already suspected this answer. Elena set her coffee cup down carefully. She looked at Ronan with an expression that contained the question neither of them wanted to be the one to say first. Ronan said it. "He's going to come for Noah directly." He kept his voice level, the same voice he used for operational facts, because the alternative, the version of his voice that would reveal what it meant to say those words about his own child, was not available to him right now, not in this diner, not when they needed him to be the person with a plan. "He's gone to ground. Holt's team missed him at the scene. We have federal protective detail active starting now, but Mercer will find a way around it. He has enough intelligence on federal protocols from his network to—" "Then what do we do?" Elena said. Her voice was quiet and direct, and she was looking at him the way she had looked at him across the kitchen in the penthouse. The look that asked, "Who are you now? And is this person someone I can trust with the only thing in the world that matters to me?" Ronan looked at her. He looked at Noah. He said, "We stopped waiting for him to come to us." Elena stilled. "You want to go after him?" "I know where he'll go." He said it carefully, building it as he said it, the intelligence and the geography and the years of knowing how Victor Mercer operated, assembling into a shape he could see clearly. "When Mercer ran operations inside my network, he used a facility for sensitive work that I never officially knew about. He kept it off the books. It was his private infrastructure, not Vale property. A decommissioned shipping terminal on the Red Hook waterfront. He used it for things he didn't want documented." He paused. "He'll go there. Because he knows every other address we might know. Because that address exists nowhere in any file that Marcus had access to. Because it's his." Elena said, "How do you know about it if he kept it off the books?" "Because I'm thorough," Ronan said. "And because 8 years ago, when he left my organization, I had a question about whether the departure was clean. I looked." He looked at her directly. "I looked, and I found it, and I decided the answer was clean enough, and I walked away from it. That was a mistake I don't intend to compound." Elena held his eyes for a long moment. Then she said, "He'll expect you to come." "Yes." "He'll have men there." "Yes. And you're going in anyway." I'm going in first, Ronan said. Before he finishes regrouping, before he resupplies and repositions and makes a second run at Noah with better preparation. There is a window right now. He's rattled. His queen's element is in federal custody. He's lost his comms advantage. The window closes in approximately 4 hours. He looked at the table, then back up. After that, this gets harder and more dangerous for everyone in this booth. Elena was very still. Something was moving behind her eyes that she was not yet saying. Noah said very quietly, I want to come. No, Elena and Ronan said simultaneously. Noah looked between them. Something in the simultaneity of it, the unplanned, unrehearsed unison of two people who had just agreed on something without discussing it, registered on the boy's face in a way that was almost too much to look at directly. Okay, Noah said. He folded his hands on the table. Then come back. The two words landed with the simple weight of the most unambiguous thing anyone had said to Ronan in years. He looked at his son. Yeah, he said. He looked at Elena. She was looking back at him, and her face held everything she was not saying and had not yet decided to say, and the overhead light of the diner caught the particular set of her jaw, stubborn, worn, present, entirely herself. And he thought about 10 years, about the shape of a decade, about all the versions of this moment they might have had and didn't. And then he thought about the 4-hour window and stood up. Holt's men stay with you, he said. Don't move from this location until I call. If you don't hear from me come back, Elena said. Her voice was flat and quiet, and it brooked nothing. He held her eyes for one moment. Then he turned and walked out of the diner into the cold Queen's night. And behind him through the glass, he could see Elena put her arm around Noah and Noah lean into her exactly as much as he needed to, and no more. And Ronan kept walking because if he looked back again, the Red Hook waterfront in November felt like the edge of the world. Wind off the harbor cutting through everything, the smell of brine and rust and diesel that never fully left these blocks no matter what they built over them. Ronan drove the green pickup south through Brooklyn with the window cracked, the cold keeping him sharp, the shoulder throbbing in a steady rhythm that he used as a kind of clock, something to measure the passage of the next hour against. He called Holt from the truck. I need the Red Hook terminal, he said. Pier 39, the decommissioned cold storage facility. Whatever you can get me on current occupancy. Heat signatures, vehicle count, anything satellite has from the last 6 hours. Holt was quiet for a moment. You're going there. Before dawn. Yes. Ronan, I need what you have. That's all I'm asking. Another pause. Then, 2 vehicles confirmed in the lot as of 40 minutes ago. No thermal available for the interior. The building's walls are too thick. Old refrigeration insulation. It absorbs. A breath. My team can be there and... Your team announces itself, Ronan said. This needs to be quiet first, loud after, if there's anything left to be loud about. That's not reassuring. It wasn't meant to be. How many men does he have left that are unaccounted for? Based on what we processed from Queens, 3 of the original group are in custody, 2 incapacitated at scene. That leaves 3 to 5 unaccounted, plus Mercer. 4 to 6 total. Not good. Not impossible. Position your team 2 blocks out, Ronan said. If you hear anything that sounds like the situation resolving, move in. Don't come in before that. Define resolving. You'll know. He ended the call and drove. The terminal sat at the end of a finger pier that jutted into the harbor, a long, flat building of reinforced concrete that had once stored refrigerated cargo and now stored nothing, its loading bays sealed, its dock equipment rusted to sculpture. A chain-link fence surrounded the lot, padlocked, with a vehicle gate on the south side that had been forced open recently. The chain hung cut, the gate slightly ajar in the way of something used and not bothered to close. 2 vehicles in the lot, a van and a sedan, both dark, both cold enough that they'd been there at least an hour. Ronan left the pickup 2 blocks back and came to the fence on foot, following the perimeter east where the fence met the building's corner, and the angle meant the lot's interior cameras, if there were any, would have the worst coverage. He found the place where the fence had been pulled loose at the base years ago, a detail he remembered from his investigation 8 years back, and went through low and fast. The building had 4 entry points that he knew of. Loading bay on the north face, sealed. Roll door on the east, padlocked from outside, which meant it wasn't being used as an exit. Service door on the west face. Main entrance on the south, facing the lot. He went west. The service door was unlocked, which meant they'd either been careless or they'd left it as an invitation. He stood outside it in the dark for 30 seconds, listening. Wind off the water, distant harbor traffic, the particular quality of silence inside a large empty building. Not empty silence, but occupied silence, the sound of people trying not to make sound. He went in. The interior was vast and black and smelled like decades of cold. A cold that had soaked into the concrete and never fully left. The ghost of refrigeration, something that lived in the walls. Ronan stood just inside the door and let his eyes adjust and did not move until they had. Shapes resolved, support columns in rows, old equipment housings, overhead rigging, the tracks where refrigeration units had once hung. A catwalk 20 feet up running the length of the building. At the far end, through 2 sets of internal doors, a faint light. Not electric, something smaller. A work lamp or something battery-powered. He moved along the west wall, keeping to the columns. He found the first man at the interior door, standing with his back to the approach, watching the light source at the far end. Amateur positioning. Ronan took him down without the man completing his turn, controlled and quiet, and lowered him to the concrete floor and kept moving. The second man was on the catwalk above. Ronan saw his silhouette against the roof's clerestory windows. Moonlight through dirty glass, just enough to outline a shape. This one had angles. This one was the problem. Ronan moved between the columns, using their spacing to stay out of the catwalk sight line, working toward the interior doors and the light. If the catwalk man had radio contact with Mercer, he was already compromised. If he didn't, he had maybe another 40 seconds before the first man's silence registered as wrong. He went through the interior doors fast and low. The light source was a battery camp lantern set on an overturned crate. Around it, in what had once been the terminal's operations office, a glass-walled room with half its glass broken out, open to the main floor. Victor Mercer stood with 2 men flanking him and Marcus Hale sitting on a chair against the far wall. Marcus looked up when Ronan came through the door. His face did something complicated. Mercer turned. He looked unsurprised. The specific unsurprise of a man who had expected this and had prepared for it and was now simply watching the preparation pay out. "I thought you'd come here," Mercer said. "I know you thought that," Ronan said. He was looking at the 2 flanking men, calculating. His shoulder was bad. His left arm was going to be unreliable in any close contact situation. He needed distance if he could keep it. "You left the west door open." "I did." 1 man at the interior door, 1 on the catwalk, 2 here. Ronan stopped moving at the edge of the lantern's light. "That's the whole count. You came here with 4 men. Something moved in Mercer's face. "My Queen's operation was degraded." "Yes." Ronan looked at him steadily. "You came here with 4 men because you ran out of moves. The federal team is processing your people. Your communications advantage is gone. Your inside contact," he glanced at Marcus, who had not moved, who was sitting with his elbows on his knees and looking at the floor, "is blown. You have a 4-hour window before Holt's team locks down every exit from this city." "Then so do you," Mercer said. "I only need 20 minutes. One of the flanking men moved and Ronan's hand came up with the compact and the man froze. Mercer raised one hand slightly, hold, and the man stopped. The old operations room was quiet except for the wind off the harbor, finding its way through the broken glass and the distant sounds of the buildings settling around them. Mercer looked at Ronan with the expression of a man who had something left to say and had decided to say it. "You know what I find genuinely interesting," he said. "In 30 years, every decision you ever made was about building something. The network, the alliances, the financial structures. You built obsessively, and everyone around you understood that the building was the point. Not what got built, not what it was for. Just the construction itself." He paused. "And then a boy clears tables in a Brooklyn restaurant, and all of it, becomes secondary to a different thing entirely." "Don't," Ronan said. "I'm not mocking it. I'm observing it. Mercer's voice was even and genuine in a way that was somehow worse than contempt. A child exists, and you become an entirely different person in 11 days. That's remarkable. And it's also the most dangerous thing that's ever happened to your organization, because the people who count on your predictability now have to recalculate everything, and some of them are going to recalculate in a direction you won't like. Like you did. I had 30 years invested in a future that your heir eliminates. Mercer said it without heat. A fact. What would you have done? I wouldn't have burned the restaurant, Ronan said. I wouldn't have gone after a woman and a 9-year-old boy. No. You'd have come directly for me. Mercer tilted his head slightly. Which is what you're doing now. Yes. So we agree on the principle. We disagree on the application. Victor, Ronan kept his voice level. I'm not here to debate it with you. I'm here because as long as you're operational, my son is a target. That's the only math that matters to me tonight. Mercer was quiet for a moment. He looked at Ronan. Really looked. The way men looked at each other when they had known each other long enough to read below the surface of what was being said. How do you want this to go? Mercer said. You surrender to Holt's team. Tonight. Full cooperation. Everything you have on your network, your financial infrastructure, your contacts, everything. In exchange for federal processing instead of what happens if I handle this privately. And Marcus? Ronan looked at Marcus. Marcus had raised his head and was watching Ronan with an expression that was beyond reading, what's guilt and calculation, and something that might have been relief and something that was definitely fear. And all of it worn on a face that Ronan had trusted for 12 years across 100 situations where trust was the only thing that made the machinery run. Marcus made his choice, Ronan said. That's between him and Holt. Marcus looked at the floor again. Mercer was quiet for a long moment. He was doing the math. Ronan could see it, the internal processing of a man who had built his career on knowing when leverage was real and when it was theater, and which side of that line the current moment sat on. He looked at the two men flanking him, said, "Step back." They looked at each other. "Step back," Mercer said again, and they did. He looked at Ronan. "I want it in writing from Holt before I say a word. I'll get him on the phone." "Then get him." Ronan pulled the burner and called Holt, and 3 minutes later the terms were spoken into the phone and acknowledged, and Mercer listened to Holt's voice and made his decision, and the decision was the one that kept him alive. The two flanking men set their weapons on the crate beside the lantern when Ronan told them to. He called Holt again and said, "Come in." The federal team arrived in 4 minutes, which meant they'd been closer than 2 blocks, which meant Holt had made his own calculation about instructions and proximity, and Ronan chose not to address that because the outcome was the same. They processed the scene with the particular efficiency of people who had done this before in conditions less cooperative than this one. Mercer was cuffed without incident. He looked at Ronan once as they walked him out, a long, flat look that contained neither regret nor defiance, just the acknowledgement of two men who had occupied the same world for a long time and had arrived at its terminus. Marcus walked out under his own power, federal agent at each elbow, and when he passed Ronan, he stopped for a moment. Ronan looked at him. 12 years, Marcus said. I know. I don't have anything to say that's going to... Then don't say it, Ronan said. Not angry, just done. Marcus nodded once and walked. Holt appeared at Ronan's shoulder. He looked at the shoulder in question, the way Ronan was holding his left arm, and said, "You need a hospital." "Later." "Now, ideally." "I said later." Ronan looked at the waterfront through the terminal's open loading bay, the harbor black and moving in the pre-dawn wind. "Is it done?" "Mercer's in custody. His network is going to take us 6 months to fully map, but the operational leadership is gone tonight. The people who were running active assets for him..." Holt paused. "Yeah, it's done." Ronan stood at the edge of the loading bay for a moment. The cold off the water was total, the kind that got into the joints and the chest and made the body's complaints very clear. He pulled out the burner and called Cullen. "It's over," he said. "Bring them home." Chum. He got to the hospital because Elena made him. She arrived at the diner's rendezvous point with Noah and Cullen at 4:40 a.m. And when she saw his shoulder, she put her hand on his right arm without saying anything and steered him to the car and told Cullen, the nearest emergency room, and sat in the back with Noah, while Ronan sat in the front and tried to argue about it once, and stopped when she gave him the look that had never in 10 years lost its particular effectiveness. The shoulder was not broken. 2 ligaments pulled badly, one partially torn. A bone bruise that the attending physician described in terms Ronan listened to with the patience of a man who had been told worse and survived. He'd need a sling for 3 weeks and physiotherapy after that, and the doctor said this with the cheerful authority of someone who hadn't seen the last 12 hours and therefore believed that 3 weeks of sling wearing was the most significant item on the immediate agenda. Ronan thanked him and meant it. Elena waited in the hallway with Noah, and when Ronan came out with the sling, Noah looked at it with the focused assessment of someone adding it to a running file. "Does it hurt?" Noah asked. "Some." "You should have told him you needed something stronger," Noah said, "for the pain." "I'll be fine." Noah looked at him. "I know," he said. "I was just saying." They did not go back to the penthouse. Elena had a practical reason. The penthouse was the most visible address in Ronan's life, and even with Mercer in custody, the visibility felt wrong for the first few days. But the real reason, the one she articulated on the second morning over coffee in a rented house in Park Slope that Ronan had arranged through a contact with no organizational ties, was something else. "I don't want Noah's understanding of his father to be formed in a building that looks like what you are," she said. "I want him to know who you are first. The building can come later, or not at all." Ronan looked at her across the kitchen table. "What's the difference?" "What you are is the empire. Who you are is the man who ran through a tunnel in Queens with a bad shoulder to buy us 45 minutes. She held her coffee cup. "Noah should know that person first?" He said nothing for a moment, then, "And you? What do you need to know first?" She looked at him steadily. "I need to know whether the man who made a unilateral call about Noah's formal declaration is going to make the next one the same way. He won't. I need to believe that, Ronan, not just hear it." "I know." He set his own cup down. "Then I'll show you." She looked at him for a long moment, not with warmth yet. The warmth would take time, and they both understood that, and neither of them was going to pretend otherwise, but with something that was the beginning of possibility. A door not yet opened, but no longer locked. "Okay," she said. The weeks that followed were not easy, and Ronan had not expected them to be. Noah had questions that came at unexpected moments, at dinner, in the car, once at 9 p.m. when he appeared in the hallway in his pajamas and stood in the doorway of the room where Ronan was working through paperwork and said, "Did you love my mom before I was born?" Ronan looked up from the desk. "Yes," he said. "Did you stop?" "No." Noah considered this with the same flat patience he applied to everything. "Did you look for her? After she left?" This one Ronan sat with for a moment. The honest answer was complicated. He had looked, in the first months, with the furious energy of a man who believed he'd been abandoned and was looking for confirmation rather than resolution. And when the looking hadn't produced her, he had converted the grief into the empire and told himself it was the same thing. "Not the way I should have," he said. Noah nodded slowly. "Okay," and went back to bed. Ronan sat at the desk for a long time after. He told Elena about the exchange the next morning. She listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she looked out the window and said, "He processes things at night. He always has. You'll get used to the doorway appearances." "How do you usually handle them?" "Honestly," she said, "even when the honest answer is complicated, he always knows when he's being managed, and he shuts down when he feels it." She paused. "He's like you in that way." Ronan absorbed this. "In what way?" "He'd rather have the difficult truth than the comfortable approximation." The days built on each other. Ronan learned the rhythms of a household that operated differently from any environment he'd spent time in. The precise schedule of a 9-year-old who took his routines seriously. The way Elena organized a kitchen with the same focused efficiency she'd organized the restaurant. The specific domestic texture of 2 people who had not lived together, who were finding the grammar of it slowly, without forcing it. He sat with Noah over homework 3 evenings in a row before Noah stopped looking up every few minutes to check if he was still there. He took Noah to a bookstore on a Saturday morning because the library book Noah had been reading in every crisis of the last 2 weeks had finally been finished, and there needed to be a next one. And Noah spent 45 minutes in the fiction section with the serious focus of a professional making a procurement decision, and Ronan stood nearby and said nothing and did not rush him. And when Noah finally chose 2 books and brought them to the counter, he paid for them without making it a thing, which was, he would later understand, exactly the right call. Noah didn't say thank you immediately. He said it in the car, looking out the window, as an afterthought, or maybe not as an afterthought at all. Just, thanks for the books. Sure. A pause. And for the other stuff. Ronan kept his eyes on the road. Yeah. Holt called in the 3rd week with the update Ronan had been waiting for. Mercer had entered full cooperation with the federal investigation. His network was being dismantled methodically. Port contacts, shell corporations, money laundering infrastructure, the state-level contractor connection that had given 3 officials a very bad November. The process would take months, and the legal proceedings longer than that, but the operational fact was simple. Victor Mercer would not see the outside of a federal facility for the remainder of his functional life. Marcus had cooperated also, under the specific pressure of evidence that was comprehensive enough to leave him no productive alternative. He would do time. How much was a legal question that Ronan had deliberately removed himself from influencing, because the anger was still there, cold and deep and not going anywhere. And he didn't trust himself to influence it fairly. The formal Vale heir declaration had been processed legally and was now a matter of record. Noah Hart, named Noah Vale in the filing, was the legitimate heir to the Vale family line. This produced exactly the conversations in the inner network that Ronan had anticipated. 6 men who needed direct meetings, 4 alliances that required renegotiation, 2 situations that resolved themselves into loyalty, and 1 that resolved itself into departure. All manageable, all handled on Ronan's terms, not from crisis, but from position. He told Elena about the filing's legal completion on a Thursday evening when Noah was doing homework at the kitchen table, and they were standing in the narrow hallway that separated the kitchen from the living area, talking in the low voices of 2 people who had gotten used to the geography of a shared space. She said, "How does it feel?" He thought about it, like something being set right. She looked at him. "For you or for him?" "Both," he said. "Is that allowed?" The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but the shape that preceded one, the early architecture of it. "I think so," she said. The dismantling of the Empire's criminal infrastructure was not fast, and it was not clean, and it was not something Ronan accomplished with the dramatic finality of a single decision. It was a long process of redirection, legitimate business acquisitions, the conversion of cash-heavy operations into taxable revenue streams, the slow, delicate work of extracting organizational weight from the structures that had required violence to maintain and transferring it to structures that didn't. He had good lawyers and 1 excellent accountant, and Holt's careful non-involvement, which was the most useful form of federal assistance available. He did not pretend to Elena that he was becoming a different person. He told her what he was doing and why and what it would take and how long, and she listened with the practical intelligence she applied to everything and asked questions that were sharp and specific, and he answered them fully. She was not an observer in his life. That was the first thing he understood. She was never going to be someone who stood at the edge of things and watched. She had run a business alone for 6 years on nothing but her own intelligence and stubbornness, and that was the person she was. And the person she was had opinions about the direction of Ronan's financial restructuring that were sometimes inconvenient and consistently right. By the 2nd month, she was reviewing acquisition documents with him at the kitchen table after Noah went to bed. By the 3rd month, she had identified a flaw in the Callaway LLC conversion that their lawyers had missed. By the 4th month, she was doing it without either of them remarking on it, which was when Ronan understood that the trust had returned. Not the old trust, not the trust of 2 young people who hadn't yet tested each other against the worst, but something harder and better and more reliable. The trust of 2 people who had seen each other's capacity for damage and error and had decided to continue. The restaurant took 4 months to repair. Elena oversaw the reconstruction herself, making decisions about the space that were partly practical and partly something else, a refusal to let Victor Mercer's fire change what Hart's Kitchen was. The photographs of old Brooklyn went back on the walls. The handwritten menu board went back in the window. The corkboard above the kitchen counter went back up with its schedules and reminders and Noah's dentist appointments. She reopened on a Thursday in March. Full house. Carla was back. 3 new evening staff, because the business had grown in the neighborhood's attention after the story of the fire had circulated and people had come out of loyalty and stayed out of affection. Ronan was there for service. He sat in the corner table, his table, the table where the whole thing had begun, and ate the food and drank the coffee and watched Elena work the room with the competence and warmth that she'd always had and that the last several months had not diminished. Noah worked the tables on weekends. He was still meticulous about the salt shakers. He still carried the gray plastic bin with the focused efficiency of someone who had been doing it forever, which he had. One evening in early summer, the 3 of them walked home from the restaurant through Brooklyn streets that had gone soft with evening heat, Noah between them, carrying one of his books tucked under his arm. He was talking about something from school, a history unit, a project about New York that he was approaching with the intensity he brought to things he decided were worth bringing intensity to. And Ronan listened and occasionally said something, and Elena laughed once at something Noah said, and the laugh was real and easy, and the block was quiet and warm, and the streetlights were coming on. Noah stopped at the corner. He looked up. The evening sky was still pale at the edges, the city's light bleeding into it, and for a moment the 3 of them stood at the corner in the particular stillness of a moment that didn't require anything from anyone. Noah said, "Are we staying here, in Brooklyn?" "For now," Elena said. "Does that work for you?" He considered. "Yeah." He looked at Ronan. "Are you here too? Like, actually here?" Ronan looked at his son standing on a Brooklyn corner with a library book under his arm, and the veil crest at his throat, and the gray eyes that asked the question directly because he'd decided that direct was better than waiting. "Yeah," Ronan said. "Actually, here." Noah nodded, satisfied. He started walking again. Ronan and Elena followed. Their hands were close at their sides, not touching yet. That would come. It was already coming, the slow, inevitable closing of a distance that had cost them both 10 years and everything, but close. The summer evening settled around the 3 of them, and the street continued, and ahead of them Noah turned the corner without waiting, and they followed him into it together. 6 months after the night at Hart's Kitchen. 6 months after the rain and the gray-eyed boy and the name that had stopped Ronan mid-step in a Brooklyn restaurant. Ronan Vale stood on the roof of the Park Slope house at 7 in the evening with the Manhattan skyline visible to the north and the neighborhood spread out below him in the particular golden quality of late summer light. He heard the door behind him. Elena came out and stood beside him and looked at the skyline and said nothing for a while. "Noah's asleep," she said. Fell out mid-sentence. "He was telling me about some argument he had about the history project." "Who won the argument?" "He did probably. He usually does." She paused. "He gets that from you." "He gets it from you." "He gets it from both of us," she said. "That's the honest answer." He looked at her. The evening light was good to her face, and the last 6 months had put something back in it that the previous years had taken. Not youth, she was 33 and looked it, and that was fine, but rest. The particular quality of a person who was no longer doing everything alone. He reached into his jacket pocket and held out what he'd put there 3 days ago and had been deciding about since. She looked at it. A ring, simple, white gold, without flourish. "I'm not asking you to go back," he said. "I'm not asking you to pretend the 10 years didn't happen, or that anything about this situation is simple, or that I'm the same person you knew before, or that you should trust me the way you trusted him." He paused. "I'm asking if you want to build something forward, from here, the 3 of us." Elena looked at the ring for a long moment. Then she looked at him. "You should have asked me 6 months ago," she said. "I wasn't ready 6 months ago." "I know." The corner of her mouth moved. "I wasn't either." She looked at the ring again, then at the skyline, then back at him. "Noah's going to want to be involved in planning whatever comes next. He's going to have opinions about everything." "I know." "He'll probably tell us we're doing it wrong." "Probably." And you're going to listen to him. I'm going to try, Ronan said, and the honesty of the qualification, the acknowledgement that trying was what he had to offer, not certainty, not a clean record, not 10 years returned, was the most he had ever given anyone. Elena took the ring from his hand. She didn't put it on yet. She held it in her palm and looked at it and looked at the skyline and stood there with him in the warm end of a summer day while the city went about its 10,000 simultaneous lives below and around them. Then she said, "Okay." Not a concession, not a surrender. A decision made by a woman who made decisions with both eyes open and had paid the price of every one of them and was choosing again anyway, which was the bravest thing Ronan Vale had ever personally witnessed. He exhaled something that had been held for 10 years. Below them, in the house, a 9-year-old boy slept with his library book open on the pillow beside him, and a silver crest at his throat, and the particular deep stillness of a child who had spent the last 6 months slowly, carefully, without making a production of it, learning what it felt like to have the weight distributed, to not carry the awareness of his mother's exhaustion alone, to not be the only fixed point in a world that had seemed to require his steadiness. He was sleeping the way children slept when they finally felt safe. Outside, the city held them all in its enormous, indifferent grip, as it always had. The harbor moved. The lights came up across the skyline, one by one, the way they always did when the day let go. And on a rooftop in Brooklyn, 2 people who had been separated by 10 years of lies and fear and other people's calculations stood together in the warm last of the summer evening, the ring in her hand and the city below them and everything that had been taken from them. Not returned, because some things didn't return. Some years were simply gone, but replaced, rebuilt, made into something that bore the marks of what it had cost and was stronger in those places, the way healed bone was denser than the bone that had broken. They stood there until the light was fully gone. Then Elena put the ring on her own finger, looked at it once, and said, "Come inside." He followed her in. The door closed behind them. The city continued as it always had, as it always would, vast and loud and entirely indifferent to the small and total fact that 3 people had found their way to the same rooftop, the same table, the same corner in Brooklyn, the same home, which was, in the end, the only kind of victory that lasted.